Welcome back to today's session. Over the past several weeks, going on months, I have been covering how to understand depression, but more importantly, strategies that can be implemented to overcome depression. Strategies that can help you overcome anxiety, obsessive worry and doubt, or fear. And what I'd like to do in today's session is take things on a slight detour because I think it is necessary, but also it punctuates all of the strategies that we have covered so far. For most people, it's not unusual for the belief to be that there is a strategy that is missing. There's something tactical that I have to do that I am lacking, and therefore my goals, my dreams, my hopes elude me. I know for myself particularly, if I use the area of say business or the area of lifestyle, the area of you know wellness and health, every time something wasn't right, I would always default back to strategies. For example, I'm out of shape. My instinctual position would be to say that I need to find out or learn or start a new workout. In business, when things do not work, I never stopped and said to myself, well, maybe the strategy that I'm applying is perhaps not optimal. I always found that I would always default to something that I did before, reach out to something new or novel, or keep doing the same thing. Subconsciously, it was always about the belief that there was a strategy, something I had to apply. You've been doing this for so long, you need a new strategy. Now, for most people, that would be the case. And in many areas of my life, that has helped. But it has never been enough. And that is what I want to share in today's session. Strategies are never enough. They're very important, they're very useful, but they're never enough. Generally speaking, it's usually about 80%, sometimes even 90% psychology, and 20% strategy or the mechanics. How to go from A to B is between 10 and 20% of the effort. Most of the weight tends to lie in the mind. And that is partly why in this section of the series, I've spent so much time trying to explain how the mind works. We started with the body. You're struggling with depression. It's very easy to say perhaps there's something physical, which for most people, and for some people rather, it could be physical. So I started by explaining how you have to get the right fuel in your tank. In other words, the right diet. Make sure your gut function is right. Make sure your mitochondria is firing on all the right cylinders, but using the right fuel. Making sure that your adrenal glands and your thyroid glands are working perfectly well. Therefore, you don't have a risk of either an underactive thyroid or maybe say chronic fatigue. But then going as far as looking at the role that water plays in your body, fourth phase water or structured water, and the role that exercise and sleep play in your well-being. Those are all strategies, those are all things to do. And then I moved on to psychology, the mind, how it functions, the intellect, how our emotions are created. And I've been sharing strategies upon strategies upon strategies. And for so many people, you can get inundated with all of these strategies. But keep in mind, all of these strategies only make up about 20% of the issue. It's usually 80% psychological, sometimes even as much as 90%, or mental, which is partly why the mental has to be understood. But what I would like to talk about in today's session perhaps is an important section that I haven't covered as much, which is we all have a story we tell ourselves. I don't know what that story is, but there is a blueprint, there's a script that has been fed into your subconscious, either by association, either by your acts of omission or commission, or just by being in an environment. Now, for some other people, it might be something you've inherited by virtue of your lineage, perhaps a cultural thing, an ancestry line. You've been frozen in a tradition of the past, and therefore you've inherited the sins that came with such a past, and you're living that story. The story we tell ourselves can make or they can break us. The stories we tell ourselves can limit us or they can free us. Now, depression is one of said stories. It's one of the stories we tell ourselves. An anxious life, an anxious person is another story. A fearful, worrisome person is another story. What is the story you have about yourself? And that is what I would like to encourage you to think about. Get a piece of paper, get a journal, and make notes. Make a list of things, perhaps, that make up the story of your life. Some people do not have stories that include any form of depression. And for that reason, they don't experience depression. Not because it cannot happen to them, but they are so focused on other things. Therefore, their psychology does not default back to fear, worry, doubt, anxiety, and depression. What is your story? Because until you understand your story, you can carry on with all of the strategies and still fall short of your goal. Until you divorce yourself of the story that is limiting you and you, in many ways, become one with a more empowering story, you will always be limited. We have this abundance of infinite potential within our grasps. It's within our potential. We don't really understand what it means when we say infinite potential. We don't know what to compare it to, but in many ways it's just simply signifies something that is boundless and without limitations. And therefore, if you can think of anything that is good, or anything that is praiseworthy, anything that is kind and just, anything that is abundant, and anything that is pure, it means your limits that you may have placed on yourself is restricting you from becoming who you can be. The story you tell yourself places limits on you. I have said before in sessions prior that you have to be careful about how you define yourself. Because whatever you define yourself as, or whatever defines you, or whatever you were defined by, places a limit on you. That becomes your story. And so for most people, you all have the strategy. It's not a matter of strategy. It's not a matter of mechanics, and it's not a matter of tactics. You know what to do. But for so many people, the issue is more their story. The story, the blueprint, the script that they've written for themselves. Now, they hate the outcomes that come from said script, but they cannot divorce themselves. And so in today's session, the recommendation is divorce yourself from that story and choose a new one. If infinite potentiality is something that is within your grasp or your birthright, then it means you have to let go of the past and its limitations, good, bad, or indifferent. You've spent that check already. You've paid the price. Don't keep paying. Now think about this from a business perspective. Just imagine you walked into Tesco and you picked up a few sandwiches and perhaps some lemons and some soft drinks, and it totaled £9.95. And you pulled out your card and you paid. You went home and you enjoyed the meal. Every morning on your way out, as you walk past the Tesco, you walk back inside and then you pay another £9.95 and then you leave. And you repeat this every single day. But each time you pay, you are not taking anything in return. You're just simply paying for something you had paid for before. And that is partly what happens with most people. You've paid once for the past. You've even paid twice or multiple times for your past. You don't have to keep paying over and over again. Let go. Just let go and let God. And that requires you divorcing your story from the past or the present and embracing and getting wedded, becoming one with a more empowering story. You will not change the outcomes of your life until you change the story you tell yourself. It's part of the reason why I took a pause in this session with regards to the mind to introduce the whole concept of a story. The mind is a powerful tool. It's not really, in many ways, an activity. It's more like an activity that takes place within, through us, as opposed to it being something we can tangibly touch and feel. But the mind is powerful, and it needs images. Actually, let me say something so you can understand. As part of this whole process of overcoming depression and anxiety and worry, and even finding the good life, our minds tend to have this desire to have a hero. We need a future, and we need a positive story. And think about this carefully. Who is the hero in your life, in your mind, in your story? And what is the future that your mind has been given? But more importantly, what story is playing in that mind of yours? Because until you change your mind, you will be spending 100% of your time and energy and efforts without realizing that all those strategies would only give you at best 20%. And here you have 80% or sometimes greater. And all you have to do is change that story, believe the story you've changed, and feed that into your subconscious mind, using the strategies or the tactics that we've covered previously. The way to live a good life, and I mentioned the whole concept of the good life and how if you want to live a good life and if you want to have a great experience of this beautiful life we have to let go of the concept that it has to be perfect. And you have to embrace the reality that every life is lived in one day. There is no such thing as the good life, technically speaking. There is the good day, and an aggregation of days gives you a life. Your life comprises of the past, the present, and the future. But your life is not the past. You've lived it. Your life is now. You are living it. But your life could become part of, or might comprise, something in the future. You are yet to live it. And the only currency you have is the present, the story you tell yourself today. And therefore, the aggregation of the past, the future, and the now gives you a lifetime. Don't focus too much on having the good lifetime. Just focus on having the good life. And rather than focus on this good life that seems impossible to achieve, just focus on, can I have a good day every day? And the answer becomes yes, because every day you can tell a new story, or you can repeat a previously empowering story you told yourself previously. And therefore you're repeating, you're renewing, and you're effectively healing yourself without referring to other people. But the key thing to keep in mind is if you think about, and what I like to consider, the craft of having a good life. In order to have a good life, you need two things, generally speaking. There are other ways of looking at this, but I think most people would realize and recognize something in what I'm about to share. The craft, or what we call the good life, is not something that happens to you. It's something that you make happen. The good life is not a science and it's not an art. I use the word craft because it's something you get better at doing. A science would mean that if you apply certain formulas, you get the outcomes without fail. In other words, perhaps you get some absoluteness to the outcomes. But we know that two people can apply the same principles and can apply the same processes in life and have two different outcomes. So we know that the good life is not a science. We also know that it's more likely an art because we can apply different ways to understand and achieve what we want. But we also recognize that what fulfills us could be very different from what fulfills the next person. Whereas with the science, the inputs and outputs tend to be fairly consistent. And so, in order to have a good life and the craft that is required to create that life, you need two things. The first is actually success, or to put it in more easy to accept terms, achievement. We call that the science of achievement. Why? Because success can be almost formulaic. Success leaves behind clues. You just find success and copy it. And if you replicate that success, then you get the outcomes. So there is a science, a sweet science to achievement and a sweet science to success. That's one section. The other part is then where the art comes in, the art of fulfillment, the art of having a purpose. In the sessions that will follow, as I move away from this psychological aspect of the conversations and I move into the spiritual side, I will talk about the importance of purpose. Because for most people, we have a crisis of purpose, a crisis of meaning, a crisis of having a worthwhile goal or assignment, and that is reflected in our daily experiences, which seem to be negative because deep down, there's something our spirit is longing to do, which we are holding it back from doing. And so we struggle, we suffer, because we're not living the life we should be living. In any case, you have the science of achievement, but you have the art to fulfillment, which is what makes you happy, what creates that joy, what brings happiness around you. That is a craft that requires a combination of you being productive, which is what success and achievement refers to, but also you doing what you were born or you believe you were born to do, or doing something in a way that creates an abundant, fulfilled life. Most people, and I know a lot of people who fall within this category, have success. They are achieving. In the material world, most people will look to them and say, what a life they have. Many of them, or some of them in that group, are not fulfilled. And the ones who are lacking fulfillment tend to be the ones who suffer with depression and anxiety and worry and just general unhappiness. Fascinating. On the other hand, I've also met people who haven't achieved much, but they've mastered the art of fulfillment and what creates happiness and joy. And they've surrounded themselves with the responsibilities that come with making other people's lives joyful and happy. And they gain from the byproduct of reaching out and doing something for others. I don't know where you stand. I don't know if you've mastered the craft. I know for myself, I'm still learning how to master both the science of achievement or success and the art to live in a good life or fulfillment and happiness. And therefore, it is a craft we practice every day, just like cooking. We get good, we hone on the craft. Sometimes we can do it without even looking, and other times we need to look at the recipe book and make sure we follow the guidelines carefully in order to get a good meal. The point is to give yourself a fighting chance at the good life by keeping in mind that in the art of fulfillment and in the pathway to a fulfilled life, you will always need a story. You have to choose the hero in that story. And I would encourage that you make that hero yourself. Number two, you have to have a future. The mind can only move towards a thought. The mind, you cannot have the mind absent of a thought. The mind needs pictures, images, or words. That's what it feasts on. So you're either moving towards a thought or you're moving away from a thought, and therefore you have to give the mind a future that the mind can contend with, but a future within which you are the hero in that story and one which you're happy to play. And so I'll end today's session as follows by saying, if you can get the story of your life correctly, and for so many people, I know it is hard because you've been through so much and you've failed. If you're like me, you've failed several times. You've found yourself in places where you couldn't believe what you had just done or what had been done to you. And therefore, it's not unusual to find that you start to label yourself using words that you wouldn't even use to someone you dislike. We've all been there. The question is not whether we've been there, the question is where do we want to go? Where have you been? Why are you here? And where are you going? Fascinating questions of life. Each and every one of us may have had that question presented to us in one way or another. I have, when I'm traveling, when I meet people, and I'm asked to identify myself. And every time that question is put forward to me, it's a useful opportunity to stop and say, well, isn't that life? Where have you been? Why are you here? And where are you going? And I would recommend and I would encourage you in trying to find your answers to that question. Keep in mind that the stories you tell yourself and the major story you have about yourself is what is deciding the quality of your life. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.